Hi, I'm Liz Mear. I'm Chief Exec of the Innovation Agency, which is the Academic Health Science Network for North West Coast.
And I'm Kate Kirk. I'm a research fellow at the University of Birmingham.
And we're here to talk to you about our study into embedded research, which has been looking at different embedded research initiatives and is an NIHR study, which the formal title is that we're optimising the impact of health services research on the organisation and delivery of health services, a study of embedded models of knowledge co-production in the NHS. So my background with this is that I work in the North West Coast, which goes Cheshire, Mersey, South Cumbria and Lancashire. And about 5 years ago, we tried to appoint an embedded researcher. And the embedded researcher we hoped would work with academia and would then help us to roll out evidence-based practice into our NHS trusts. We couldn't appoint. And when this programme came up, I was really, really keen to get involved because I think this is a way we can make a difference to health services, to make an impact on our customers by using the strength of the researcher and the service colleagues who can roll out the evidence-based research. So what actually is an embedded researcher? Well, it's somebody who can generate knowledge and respond to the needs of a host institution. So although they're an academic, they actually work in the host institution and they make an impact with the research that's produced. They also help the host institution to build research capacity. That's really vital at the moment in our systems. When we look at the system completely changing, we've got lots of different models of care. We're moving from one model to another. We need that evidence and we need to build that research capacity into the system. There are also people who can develop relationships with staff. They're very much seen as part of the team. And this is a key to them addressing the translational gap between research and impact in practice. So I'm going to hand over to Kate now to talk a little bit more about the actual study.
Thanks, Liz. So my background is as a clinician, and now I'm working in academia as a researcher. So my motivation is largely around seeing this enormous gap, for want of a better word, that exists between the two worlds. And I wanted to be involved in research that helped try to understand that gap and find individuals and ways of working that would offer a bridge between the two. So that's kind of my motivation. So our embedded research study then was set up with 4 different work streams, and I was largely involved with 3. With work stream 3. So an overview of all of them then. So the first one aimed to review the literature that was already existing in the fields of co-production and in the field of embedded research and get a lie of the land. Work stream 2 was an environmental scan. So a scoping review of all of the initiatives that were existing in the UK already and the embedded work that was already going on. And we actually found that to be much more plentiful than we were expecting it to be from the outset. So that was really productive. Work stream 3, as I say, that's the work stream that I've been most heavily involved with, was 4 in-depth qualitative case studies and an immersion into the work that was going on with the embedded researchers and the embedded research work they were doing. So we aimed to understand their networks and activities and the range of impact that was going on. And then work stream 4, active engagement and influencing programs. So trying to find a way to disseminate these findings from a really practical, tangible way into practice so people could use these tools if they were interested in embedded researchers and the benefits they have on practice.
So how do we go about identifying examples of embedded researchers? So we set up social media accounts. You'll see the tweet on the left-hand side. We had an active Twitter account and told people were looking for examples of researchers who were embedded in health-related settings. We had lots of approaches from all different settings, not just health, actually. We had health people, we had local government people, we had some people from industry saying they thought they had embedded researchers. So we had to triage that down. And we used the 2 criteria on the screen. So were they viewed as a researcher but also generating practical knowledge that was having an impact? And were they actually physically located and immersed in the practice organisation? So was the researcher actually with those teams making an impact and helping them to spread the research? And we had a really good number when we finished. We had 45 sites in scope that we could then start to roll out the research into.
So one of our case study examples was Evansville. This has been anonymised, obviously. So it was a multidisciplinary team working on a range of projects to address different problems in practice. And it's quite a unique example because it is a team that was explicitly set up for those means. So an embedded researcher team. And it was set in a large multi-site teaching hospital. And it included researchers from an array of different backgrounds. And as part of this, they had a board that they set up, which involved senior hospital executives, as well as the embedded researchers and academic colleagues. And they used this board to work against agreed criteria to work out which projects they would be part of and undertake. And in addition to all of this work, they also were heavily involved in broader kind of research capacity building in the organisation, so supporting frontline clinicians with their individual projects and career progression as well. The second example we've chosen to show you is Bridgetown. So this is a nice comparison. So this was a single embedded researcher who actually had a clinical background and an academic interest in implementation science, which became really relevant to the way her role panned out. Again, it was a large acute hospital setting, and it was a jointly funded post, although her line management was through the university. So she also had some accountability through the clinical trust as well. And that introduces one of many challenges for embedded researchers, which is this idea of competing expectations and competing agendas. So her work is heavily weighted to research capacity building at the moment, and this project, this initiative, if you like, is in the early phases. So she's sussing out the research culture that's going on. And ultimately, the direction of her work is fueled by her individual skill set, interests and expertise. So this implementation science idea. So a nice comparison to Evansville, which is on a practical basis is a research team, whereas Bridgetown is an embedded researcher working independently. We had a lot of data for workstream 3. All of the work streams have been really productive, but workstream 3 produced so much rich data. So this is a real snapshot of our findings, preliminary findings. So there was a challenge, and there has been throughout all of the work streams, of identifying coherent and consistent goals. And this is really representative of the initiatives and how they're set up initially, but also how they evolve and grow, and how those goals and those expectations are constantly changing. That introduces nicely the idea of power, which is again changeable and diverse. In terms of the power relations that are going on, and quite unique, arguably, in terms of how these roles are set up and the kind of hybrid nature of them. Methodological and interpersonal skill and expertise is absolutely fundamental to the success and the sustainability of the initiatives, and puts a lot of emphasis on the individual researcher and their ability to work between these different boundaries and these different worlds, arguably. PPI is relevant, although not explicit in every case study. It's often going on in relation to individual projects that the embedded researchers are involved with. Although at Evansville, there was a PPI group set up specifically to support the embedded researcher team. And then finally, the emphasis on the individual, which is just fundamental, really, to what we found. So emphasis on the individual researcher and their skill set, but also individuals who support them. So people who have bought into the embedded researcher work and are there to support them, to ensure sustainability, to protect them, if you like. And that is just critical to understanding how these initiatives work.
So as Kate explained earlier, I was involved in workstream 4, which was a practical workstream looking at products that we could deploy into the system for people who wanted to recruit an embedded researcher, or for embedded researchers to consider what that meant. So the slide that you can see is a poster that we pulled together after running 2 workshops with embedded researchers and organisations that were involved in them. So they may have been universities, may have been academic health science networks, they might have been ARCs, and it just gives you some of the practical considerations and some of the experiences that embedded researchers have in their daily lives. So what did this give us in terms of thinking about the context of embedded research? So there's different drivers between academia and service. We all know that at this conference. The drivers are very different around impact and publications. But that context is changing, and we know that universities are more focused on impact now, and this is where embedded researchers can come in. both sets of organisations, or if it's not NHS, if it's local government that the research is working in, need to adapt the cultures and ways of working. In the workshops, the embedded researchers told us that sometimes they had to speak truth to power. This was very difficult. If the research had come out with a result that really wasn't palatable to service, or there were some uncomfortable findings that needed to be tackled, their job was really difficult. And they had to be able to take a stance where they had a critical distance and could be tenacious and hold on to the findings of the research. So how can you make it work in this context? Well, what we thought was really important was being clear about the type of research question that this model is appropriate for. And it is when you wanted to roll out research to make an impact. Having senior sponsors in academia and in the service setting is really important for that researcher to be able to make a difference. And also thinking about capability building for embedded researchers. A lot of people spoke about this potentially could be career suicide because you're not in a service career and you're not in an academic career. So we need to make sure that we really value the different skill sets that are needed for this mode of research. And that led us on to developing some very practical products. So we have a 16-page guide to recruitment and to development. It sets the scene for what an embedded researcher is, what you need to do as an organisation that's going to employ one or an organisation that's going to host a researcher in your team. It also gives some very practical advice on job descriptions, person specs. There are sample adverts in there, and sample development packages and links that you can make for the embedded researcher. Or if you are an embedded researcher, some of the things you need to think about in your career path. Thank you for listening to the presentation. And you may remember that at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about my experience of trying to recruit an embedded researcher into one of our geographical areas. You'll be pleased to hear that we now have an embedded researcher and we're at the point of recruiting another using the materials that we've developed during the research study. So if you've got any questions or comments, please do add them below the video and we'll read and respond.